Good evening, everyone. My name is David Freese, the Mayor of Tonganoxie. I'd like to call to order this meeting of City Council for April 5th, 2021. Mr. Porter, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Hempel.
Here.
Mr. Dale.
Here.
Ms. Stevens.
Here.
Mr. Donnelly.
Here.
Ms. McCutcheon.
Here.
Mayor Freese.
Present.
All present, Mayor. Thank you.
If you stand, if you're able, and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance, if you would. Thanks, everyone. First item up is the approval of minutes. Is there any discussion or a motion at this point?
Make a motion that we approve as presented.
Second. And a second from Mr. Dale. Thank you, gentlemen. All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Item 3, the consent agenda, reviewing of the bill payments. Is there any discussion? If not, I would be looking for a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I will make a motion to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Thank you both. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Passes unanimously. Item 4, old business, consideration of the sunset date of the mask ordinance. Mr. Brekovich, good evening.
Yes, thanks, Mayor. So this item is listed under old business because there's been at least 2 previous action items related to this. And this is the City of Tonganoxie issuing a mask ordinance or mask mandate. The current provision is set to expire April 14th. The previous discussion on this item was to let it run through March 31st. We extended it to April 14th to account for any change requires a publication of an ordinance. And so if we took any sort of action tonight, no matter what we did, it wouldn't be able to take effect until April 14th. So that's how the dates worked out. What we did provide in your packets as information were the communications from the county that they do in terms of what we call it a heat map, where it shows how many active positive cases there are in each community and how many overall cases there's been in the communities. And so we included 3, and I'll give you a 4th update because we just got one today. They've switched to do those only weekly now on Mondays. The first one that we included in the packet was from December 11th of 2020. Thank you, Mr. Porter. And the reason we included that was that's when the City Council first took action and issued a mask mandate. And at that time, there were 44 active positive COVID cases in Tonganoxie. The second slide that we included is from January 19th of 2021. And that was when the City Council took action to extend the original mask mandate. And that time, the count had gone down from 44 active positive cases down to 25. The third one we included was from last week, March 29th, where the number of active positive cases in Tonganoxie had gone down again from 25 to 5. And what we didn't have time to include, because it just came late this afternoon, is the update from today. And I can report that we are down to 1 active positive case in Tonganoxie currently. I can't speak to if there's any correlation between the action that the council took and the mask mandate, or if it's just random that the numbers were going down at the same time. The other number that we took a look at is the number of vaccinations that have been distributed in the county, in particular how many folks have received a second dose of the vaccine. And as of today's report, we're right at about 12% of the county, if the assumption is all of the reported vaccinations through the Leavenworth County Health Department went to Leavenworth County residents. So that's the number we used. The number reported in today's report against what we believe the current total population of the county is. So that number is up from last week where it was right at about 8%. So I know that within that week's time, there was, I think, a significant effort to open the next phase of vaccinations up to the public. As far as the staff report goes, Mayor, that's the level of content and material provided. Again, the Leavenworth County Health Department is the agency that is the party responsible for tracking that type of information. So that's why we share their information. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone from the public care to speak about this issue? I messed up and forgot to ask about open agenda. I apologize, or comments. If there's anyone who would care to speak, this would be a good time. Okay, council, is there any discussion? We have options to end it tonight, let it expire on the 14th, or extend it. Correct, Mr. Brakovich?
Yes, Mayor, but I believe, and Ms. Kursel can correct me if I'm wrong, even if we choose to end it tonight, we would still have to publish that ordinance that ends it, and so effectively, the effective date is April 14th. But you could state for the record that you're choosing to end it, and it would simply just run out on the 14th.
Okay. Any discussion? Is there a motion?
I'd like to make a motion, Mayor.
Mr. Hempel?
I'd like to make a motion that the City of Tonganoxie in mass ordinance number, let's see, what is it, 1493, let expire on April 14th at 11:59 p.m. Was that the right ordinance number? Okay, thank
We
you.
have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Mr. Porter, would you mind taking a voice?
We have discussion.
I apologize. Go ahead.
I think we can all agree on a few things. Wearing a mask is a complete hassle. We can all agree that it will be awesome when COVID is over. I miss going to see live music at big venues in Kansas City. I love being with the people. And I think another thing we can all agree on is that Tonganoxie is a very caring community. I've seen people here time and time again go out of their way to help another community resident. We may agree that there are news reports from around the world that cases are going up here and there, where people have let their guard down easily. And we know that basic physics tells us that masks help reduce the spread of, well, flu, colds, COVID, etc. This bill may not pass tonight, but what I do know is that as a caring community, I would encourage people to mask up when they're around people who are older, who haven't been vaccinated, who may have immunity concerns that you may not know about, which could be really anyone. If this doesn't pass, I'm going to be a little bummed, but I have to say I've been proud of the people who have taken this seriously in our community. And I think that the people who have taken it seriously in this community are people who have put a lot of thought into it and are caring and show our young people how to care for others.
Thank you, Ms. Stevens. Does anyone else care to make a comment? Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Mr. Porter, will you call the roll for a vote, please?
Ms. McCutcheon,
No.
Ms. Stevens,
No.
Mr. Dale,
Yes.
Mr. Donnelly,
Yes.
Mr. Hempel.
Yes,
Motion passes 3-2, Mayor. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you, everyone. On to new business.
I do just have a quick afterthought.
Go ahead.
Those of you who voted no, if you do have a simpler, better, easier way to help keep our folks safe from COVID, I'd love to hear your plan.
And Mr. Brakovich, do I have this correct, that if a business, if I have a gavel store and I require a mask to enter and someone refuses, that person is trespassing, is that correct?
It could be. Our interpretation is that businesses are still allowed to add that in as a layer, similar to kind of a no shirt, no shoes, no service type restriction.
Okay.
But it's not something that the city's mandating or that the city would issue a citation based off of a city ordinance on. But if the store has the requirement and the patron is not willing to participate and they're forced to call the police department for assistance, they could be hit with a trespassing.
Okay, all right, thank you very much.
I have a question from staff real quick as well. The vote's been done, so that's over. But I'm curious about the state's legislative updates and potential liability issues on municipalities. Has that been researched or looked into at this point?
In terms of, I just want to make sure I understand the question.
In terms of the, as I understand it, the legislative council
Yes.
overruling the governor's executive orders and the statewide mask ordinance,
Yes.
and then some potential ramifications of that.
Yes. So Anna may have some additional clarifications, but our understanding of Senate Bill 40 is what was adopted and the governor signed off on. The recent actions that have transpired from that was the governor wanted to extend the declaration of emergency. That Legislative Oversight Council then took a vote as is provided in that Senate bill, and they overturned the governor's decision on this. So for cities that look at things like using home rule to develop an ordinance around the mask, we don't believe that that is the same as issuing a state of emergency for it. So in terms of some of the liability and legal maneuvering embedded in how one would go about declaring a state of emergency, that's the beef of what was provided in that House bill or Senate bill. That the ordinance, the mask ordinance, kind of existed outside of that. At least that was our general interpretation. Anna, if you want to add some clarification, that'd be great.
Yes, this is Anna Kerselich. That analysis is correct. You do have home rule authority to adopt ordinances that don't conflict with state law, and there's no state law that says you cannot do this. So the city has the right to adopt an ordinance like this and to enforce it. So I would agree with that analysis.
Okay, any other questions, any other statements? We'll keep monitoring the situation. Thank you, everyone. On to new business. Ordinance 1495, rezoning the KC RVR property located at 0000 State Avenue. Mr. Brakovich?
Thanks, Mayor. So this action request tonight is kind of the culmination of a number of previous events. To briefly restate it, years ago, 2+ years ago, we had a development proposal to consider creating a luxury RV resort on, I guess it would be the east side of the city limits. Part of that included rezoning some commercial properties along 2440. So the two action items that were taken at that time were a special use permit to allow the RV resort to go in and rezoning connected to those rezoning commercial lots. The time frame connected those two action items. So if they didn't get the special use permit approved or filled with their project, and we specifically put language in there that what they had to do was start significantly complete the engineering work related to the RV park. To date, they've most of our communications back and forth with very large gaps of no communication from the developer. The project still hadn't been financed, let alone having any engineering documents. So we brought this item back before the city council to see if the reversal, because the agreement then And what was promised to the adjacent neighbors is if this project didn't advance, the property would then be returned to the previous zoning of rural residential as opposed to the commercial zoning that was given to those State Avenue frontage. The city council gave us direction that you thought that that was the policy perspective to take. We initiated and completed the planning commission requirements for that project. The last piece of this is related to rezoning, where there was still a protest period that allowed anyone to, if they could find a valid protest to this rezoning action. And so that time frame has come and gone, and this is the first meeting then that you can take what would be the final action in rezoning this back to the rural residential zoning it had prior.
Okay, does anyone have any questions for staff?
I do, George. Just, I think we accepted those annexed into the city voluntary annex. It wasn't a forced annex. So we don't have any obligations beyond just leaving it sit as, we don't have to provide any utilities, we don't have to provide sewer, water, anything out there because it was voluntarily annexed, including the little 20-acre strip, I think, that was next to the city. I think they were both. I just want to make sure that doing this, there's no ramifications for the city to provide anything out there.
That's correct, because any plats that have been submitted with this proposal, their timeframes have also expired. So right now, it's just sitting as a piece of property. Should someone else come up with a development proposal there, they would then reinitiate those conversations with city staff, and we'd have to evaluate the utility situation.
Very good. Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Any discussion or statements from council? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
I'd make a motion, we approve ordinance number 1495, rezoning certain property located northeast of the intersection of 206th Street and State Avenue, Tonganoxie, Kansas, from GBD General Business District to RR Rural District, repealing resolution 05-1801 and ordinance numbers 1439 and 1440.
Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Dale. Mr. Porter, will you take a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Hempel,
Yes.
Mr. Donnelly,
Yes.
Mr. Dale,
Yes.
Ms. Stevens,
Yes.
Ms. McCutcheon.
Yes.
All ayes, Mayor. Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. On to item B, consider reappointment of William Prey as municipal court judge.
Thanks, Mayor. So item B and C are related, but you'll need to take individual action on each of those. Kansas state statute requires that cities of the second class, which is what Tonganoxie is classified as, make appointments during this time frame in April of specifically a municipal court judge and the city attorney. We've got incumbents that had submitted their interest in maintaining those positions, and it's staff recommendation to advance both of those for approval. Provided in the packet, Mr. Porter had previously put together a tracking list of all the appointments that need to happen this year, and has been kind enough to offer strike-throughs on those items that have already taken action. And that should show you the two actions we have remaining this evening, and I think there's a couple of library board appointments that may need to still occur before year end. But as far as the submittals, Judge Prey does an excellent job. I think he treats all of the court constituents very fairly and consistently, and Ms. Kristalik provides invaluable service and serves as a great city attorney for us. And so, like I said previously, staff would support recommending approval for both of these.
Okay, are there any questions for staff about either of these? Any discussion or statements by council?
No, Mr. Mayor, I would make a motion that we reappoint William Prey as municipal court judge.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Now we'd look for any discussion on item C? Any questions for staff? Is there a motion?
Anna, you still want the job?
I would love to.
All right. All right, if not, I'll entertain a motion.
Make a motion, we reappoint Anna Kerstlick as city attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. McCutcheon. Was it you? Okay, thanks. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion
Thank you,
passes.
Anna.
Thank you. All right. Item D, consider planning for the 2021 season at the Tonganoxie Water Park. Mr. Brakovich?
Thanks, Mayor. I'm going to do a brief introduction on this item, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Porter, who's worked closely with our public works staff, as well as Darren Shoup, our pool manager. Just to kind of remind everybody where we were about a year ago in May of 20, we were meeting and you as a group were trying to decide from a policy perspective what we were going to do with the water park for the 2020 season. And at that time, based on a lot of the input and guidelines that were developed by the regulatory agencies, it was determined that we would not open the Tonganoxie Water Park for the season. So as we're preparing for this year, we went ahead, after our discussion with the City Council, decided to go ahead and post the openings and recruit for the positions in the water park because those candidates tend to go elsewhere early in the process if we don't at least prepare as if we could be potentially opening. At the same time, we've continued to review all the same regulatory guidelines if they've been provided this year, and primarily the CDC is still functioning as the overall guideline. This year, the guidance from KDHE or the Kansas Recreation and Parks hasn't been quite as substantial as it was last year, but we still feel that some of the options that we are going to present to you tonight embed a lot of the same philosophies that were presented, again, either with the updated CDC or the guidelines that were in place even last year as far as openings go. An additional point that staff did is they reviewed the other municipal or public pools within the Kansas City metropolitan area to see what they were doing. That was a large part of our decision last year, was to decide to not open because so many other pools had already opened. We were concerned with how flooded or inundated our pool would become. So that there's a matrix that's provided in the packet within the memorandum indicating that the majority are have either already announced their opening or have announced they're expecting to open in some capacity. So that does definitely play a factor. And then the last piece before I turn it over to Mr. Porter is we felt strongly that the best avenue would be to present options based on some of the things I've already talked about as guidelines. But the four options you'll hear about tonight are bookend by the extremes: not opening again or just opening under regular business. You'll have an opportunity to hear all these options, and you don't necessarily have to select an A, B, C, or D, but rather, if there's points for discussion, you can pick and choose from any of those and direct staff to proceed from there. And they're well developed. They pretty much focus on how to open and how the operations would function if we did decide to open under those scenarios. So with that, let me turn it over to Mr. Porter, and he can give you a little more of a detail level on those.
Thank you, George. I'd like to also point out Darren Shoup's not here this evening, but he and I have had the opportunity to have multiple in-depth conversations, and I'll try to sprinkle in a few comments that he wanted to share were he available to be present this evening for the City Council. I also want to introduce Janet Falk, who's been the longtime director of the Tongi Tidal Waves team, and she's prepared the handout that I just delivered to the City Council a few moments ago with some guidelines developed collectively with the swim league that the Tongi Tidal Waves participate in. And so I think she'd be willing to address any particular questions the council have about their interest in being part of the water park operations this year. We won't have a rental agreement for the council to consider should you elect to move forward with the policy action that includes opening the park, but we'll try to have that as soon as possible at a future agenda for the Tongi Tidal Waves team. But just so you know who's here and who's not here tonight. The four options that George mentioned, I'm going to spend the most time highlighting options 2 and 3 and some of the key distinctions between those. But really the overall breakdown of the differences or the components of each of these plans include the season, which is actually similar across options 2 through 4. Our typical season opens the Saturday of Memorial Day weekend and concludes the Monday of Labor Day weekend. We also have weekends only hours of operation once school starts back up in August. And that would be, again, consistent across plans 2, 3, and 4 to run that same schedule. We talked a little bit about delaying opening or what would be the considerations if we did do that. And Darren does feel strongly that we wouldn't be able to secure the employees we need to run the park full-time should we not offer employment along the lines of when we usually do. We'd lose them to other pools or other jobs or simply just not ever get the numbers we need, in his opinion, from his recruitment efforts so far. Another key item, and probably the biggest distinction to point out, and most objectively quantified, is occupancy. So the water park has a rough occupancy limit of about 400 swimmers simultaneously. And so what you see in options 2 and 3 are 2 approaches to limiting that occupancy, which we normally don't do in the sense of counting patrons as they come and go. People come to the pool, they see it's packed. In a normal year, they decide not to come or to come in, depending on what they see. We don't actually count heads in the door and out the door and maintain that. What we propose in option 2, though, is doing just that, adding an additional admissions staff person at the gate, similar to what you see in a lot of retail establishments right now, where someone would say 5 people came in, 3 left. They'd mark that on a ticker or on a tablet or some other technology, and we'd be able to maintain a good head count of where we are with patrons. So option 2 is set at the most restrictive level proposed, or 50% of capacity. So that would include 200 patrons at the most at one time. Option 3 is slightly more relaxed at 75%, and that would result in 300 simultaneously present patrons. When we asked Darren for more information about how that stacks up to a normal busy day in the summer, back in the early 2010s, when the pool was a newer facility and there weren't as many options regionally, we probably had top days from the full 7 hours of operation that were between 700 and 850 patrons all day long. The majority of those probably came in the first couple hours, so we might have reached close to our maximum capacity back then, but in the last 3 or 4 years, our busiest days are typically 300 to 400 patrons across those 7 hours. So Darren didn't feel that either of those 2 limits would be something we would reach frequently, but we obviously don't know, with the closure of some local pools and probably the heightened interest in coming to the pool from people who weren't able to last summer, that we don't really know until we open the door what that interest is going to be and what our attendance is going to be. But just to give you some perspective about those numbers, Darren did not anticipate that either of those limits would result in too much issue in terms of turning people away because of a simultaneous occupancy limit being met. The goal, again, behind that is obviously to allow for better distancing in the facility. Once you start packing too many hundreds of people in there, there's simply no room in the water or slightly outside the water for everyone to be spread out and able to social distance to an extent. Programming is the next item, and swimming lessons and concessions are both things that options 2 and 3 both include. Probably the biggest key difference in how they're presented as options is seating. So there's lounge chairs and concession seating, and you could also consider that there's concessions queuing, waiting in line to order your food. What we'd propose in option 2 is limiting concessions and lounge seating. We control that because we provide those tables. We do allow people currently to bring in their own chair, and so there'd be some distinctions made there. But generally, the idea is full seating arrangements result in chairs pretty close together. If we were to go with option 2, we would look at things like maybe halving the number of lounge chairs. So each chair would be twice as far as usual from the other chairs. We also looked at the picnic table areas, which are really close to the queuing line for the concessions, and those could be either redirected for the queuing for concessions or potentially removing 1 or 2 of the picnic tables. So those weren't as clustered together. So those are some options that staff felt could potentially also increase distancing and safety. And there are also things that we can adjust mid-year without any issue. If things are running smoothly and we don't see any negative results of a certain approach, we can always modify that item pretty quickly. Looking at events and rentals, there's also been stated interest that we know of this year for swim team rental, as Janet's here to represent tonight, but also our private event rentals. And what you can kind of consider in our occupancy limits is our simultaneous occupancy would be imposed on the rentals that take place at the facility, just like they are during open swim time. So the swim team, including swimmers and adults either volunteering or parents just observing, would be limited to those occupancy limits that we talked about a second ago. That would also apply to groups such as churches or local organizations or family reunions that rent out the facility late in the evening. And there are a few of those that have brought numbers probably in excess of that 200 consecutive or simultaneous attendee limit. So that's something that we would advertise and confirm with people when they book the facility, that they know they can't invite 1,000 people, for instance, and all be at the facility at the same time. The odds of that are pretty low, but again, we don't really filter through people who try to rent the facility and offer too many constraints right now. So this would be a stated addition to the restrictions in options 2 and 3. Staff protection and cleaning. Obviously, with every year, cleaning the facility and maintaining it are important considerations. What Darren is committed to is doing more and making it more clear to his employees, including the directors, assistant directors who help him supervise the facility, that there will be cleaning regimens in addition to the normal pool year role of lifeguards and clerks. That's included considerations of things like cleaning common surfaces, so ranging from the checkout registers, credit card machines, all the way up to bathroom services and the locker room for the lifeguards. We understand that we know a lot more than we did last year at this time about the facts behind transmission of COVID-19 in particular. And so airborne transmission is obviously a great threat, but cleaning commonly touched surfaces is still important, and it's something that Darren committed to doing a good job of this year if the pool's allowed to open. We also have technology that we use here at 303 Bury for a temperature check for attendance. We would propose doing the same thing in options 2 and 3 at the water park. That's part of what that additional admission staff person would be responsible for, was that people were checking their temperature and that they weren't elevated as they enter the park facility. I think probably the last thing I probably didn't address enough earlier was swim lessons. Darren did also say that he's received a lot of interest this year about the swimming lessons. Those are particularly difficult to adhere to social distancing or mask requirements because they're in the water most of the time. They usually involve young children who are not either physically able to wear masks or not as good at keeping them on as maybe older people could be. And so what Darren would propose is that he would ask his staff to wear face shields or some type of mask always when outside the water, and face shields when in the water. The children participating in the event are usually going to be too young to be required to do that, but obviously we would accommodate families and children who wanted to do that. We also offer private swimming lessons in the facility, and Darren anticipated that that's going to be a huge area of interest compared to a normal year, because the group lesson setting, it's going to be a risk because it's just simply not possible to keep people socially distanced that entire time, including the guard or the instructor and the child. I think that's also an area that we can anticipate higher than average interest. So Darren has made it clear as he's interviewed potential applicants for the pool that that's something that is going to be, if provided, will be provided to the extent we can manage that demand. And we do expect, as I said, more private lessons requested rather than public lessons. But Darren felt confident that both could be provided with certain measures in place to help. I'm happy to answer any particular questions, but again, that breakdown between option 2 and 3, it can really be summed up as saying option 3 includes a higher simultaneously present patron capacity at 75% of maximum. It institutes potentially some more requirements on either wearing masks when not in the pool or in seating availability at the pool provided by the city. And it also includes more cleaning requirements and just a greater level of scrutiny on what our employees are going to need to do to keep themselves and our patrons safe. But happy to answer any particular questions you have, and hope that the council has enough information to offer some guidance to staff.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. Ms. Falk, did you have a statement or care to speak to the body? If you don't mind stepping to the podium and telling us your name and your address and all that.
Well, my name is Janet Falk. I live on 122, 63rd, 230th Street, Linwood. This would be, if the pool is open, my 12th year of doing Tonganoxie tidal waves. We did not do it last year because obviously the pool wasn't open, but also because of the pandemic. During that time, some of the teams in the league did open. They did not compete. They just did amongst their own team. Lansing Indoor Aquatic Center was one of those teams. And it was a good example for us to know, could we run our programs, how would they look, and how could we manage it? In addition to that, Eudora did open their pool, and they had some restrictions as well. So when the league met, we set up tentatively, if we were to have a swim season, what would it look like? And in that discussion, we said, well, we would take into consideration the guidelines for the city and the county. Eudora is in Douglas County. Lansing and several of the other towns or swim teams are in Leavenworth County, but DeSoto is in Johnson County. So we have 3 communities that we're looking at and counties when we consider the COVID protocol. And with that in mind, here were some of the things that we talked about and considered for running a successful swim program. And the first thing that we talked about was limiting the number of swimmers on the team. I have been very fortunate over the years, starting from a team of 35 swimmers to up to 150 swimmers the last 2 years that we have had the program. But logistically, having that many kids isn't going to work. So what we're going to do is we're going to limit it to 100 swimmers, because I have the pool for 2 hours and have 4 swim sessions. Lansing said they made it work when they had 4 to 5 swimmers in each lane so that they could have social distancing, and having half the kids split from each end. Also designating areas where kids would put their belongings to help with that social distancing. So having fewer kids at one time in the facility is going to help with that. They also said that if there was an issue, the kids in those lanes would be the only ones that would be exposed, so you're not going to have to quarantine the whole team. You would only have to quarantine the 4 kids in that lane. So that helped to contain any issues that they had come up. And they said they did not have a ton of issues with the quarantine when they ran their program that way. And they have, besides doing their league, they didn't do competition with other teams, but they did have like scrimmages throughout the season each Friday amongst the kids in their program. So another thing that we said that we wanted to do was that if we had teams, for example, Eudora says they have last year a limit of 90 people on deck because of the size of their facility. So we said, well, one thing that we could do to help accommodate the numbers would be to change the arrangement of our swim meets. Instead of having the whole team show up at the beginning of the meet and stay throughout the whole time of the duration, we would have age groups come at designated times so that we could limit the number of people on deck and the number of people in the facility. That was one way we were going to work to help to accommodate the numbers in each facility. In addition to this, we said, well, how about if we split our facilities and one team stays pretty much on one half of the facility, if you will, in a designated area, and the other team on the other side, as well as denoting certain lanes for each team. So lanes 1, 2, 3 for one team, and teams lanes 4, 5, and 6 for the neighboring team, to help, again, to keep that division and not have as much interaction between the teams. And then the third thing that we said, Lansing provided live feed during their scrimmages, and so they did not allow, because their facility is a smaller indoor facility, they did not allow spectators to come in. They only allowed their workers and the kids that were competing at the time into their facility. So if we were to have a live feed, then that would allow grandparents or parents who want to see or get close up still get that bird's eye view with the kids competing, but not necessarily have that large number in the facility. So these were some of the things that we had talked about. And in addition to that, we said we wanted to put up front that parents that came into the facility and swimmers would be required to wear masks, because until we find out how each county has outlined their COVID protocols, we knew that, for example, Eudora said everybody's got to have a mask. So I need to let my parents know, if we do this, that, hey, you need to have a mask if you're coming on facility. We want this to be a fun, safe event for our kids. And in order to make this happen this year, these are some things we need to do to be successful and safe for our kids. So I made a kind of a list of the things that the league has been talking. We will be meeting again via Zoom the first week of May to make sure we iron out all the details, because we want nothing more than for a season that's going to be safe and fun for our kids. And our kids do really want to do this, but we always put safety first. Any questions?
I have a couple of questions. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the thought that you put into this. I think it's great. Keeping it to 100 swimmers, does that mean you're going to have to cut some kids?
So here is what, in the past, I have taken pretty green swimmers, if you will, and I said that they needed to swim a certain amount because I knew we didn't have indoor facilities for kids to kind of warm up, if you will. I know they've been off a year, but I'm just going to have one requirement, and that is that they swim one length of the pool. And the reason I have this one requirement is that it's a safety concern. When I have my coaches there, if they can't swim one length of the pool, then truly they really need to take more swimming lessons. I don't require that they know all 4 strokes. And I don't even care how they get to one end of that pool. They can flop over on their backs. It's mostly just a liability and safety issue. So it'll be a one blanket statement. Can you swim one length of the pool? Then you're good. And I will just have to cap it at 100. First come, first serve thing. And I've never, said anyone couldn't be on the team, even if they had any physical handicaps of any way. It was always the safety. And sometimes, I say, hey, one more year of swim lessons and I think you're going to be fine. And sometimes parents think that if they put their kids on the swim team and their kids have major fears of the water, it's going to help them overcome it. But that isn't necessarily the best fit for them because swim team is meant to provide entertainment. It helps the kids become stronger swimmers. And I just tell them, we may not know all 4 strokes by the time the season's over, but that's okay. What you will be is a stronger and safer swimmer around water. So the only requirement is that they can swim one length of the pool.
Okay, thank you. And you're going first come, first serve. That's
Yep.
probably the best way to do it.
Yeah.
Counselor, do you have any questions for Ms. Falk?
Janet, I remember the time you came in, the first time you came to council and asked, it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
And it is so cool to have a community so small like us that have what you're doing around. I really appreciate it, and I always have appreciated it. And your thoughtfulness on what you're doing and trying to organize, you're pushing a rope trying to get 3 counties and how they're going to go the same direction. So
Right.
I
Well,
know the time is not what you spend is a lot, and I appreciate it. It is a great activity for our kids, and a lot of small towns don't have that, and keep it up.
thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions for Ms. Falk? Thank you very much. You can
All
have
right,
a seat.
so, one other little quick thing.
Sure.
I know we're still working out the details, but I did want to just plant that seed. In the past, we have had a pool party at the end of the season. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I wanted to plant that seed that if it is an option, that maybe we could consider that again this year, depending when we see how things work out. So,
Thank you very much.
thank you.
Back to Mr. Porter's presentation. I truly would like to see those options reworked into phases. So that, and I don't know what parameters you're gonna have to have, but if you have this many cases in town or something, then it goes to code orange. I mean, the library does this, Linwood Library does this. If that's possible, I'd love to see it reworked as that. That's my opinion. Council, do you have any comments for staff, questions for staff?
Comment I had, I kind of like option 3. The only thing I didn't like about option 3 is the contact information collections, because you're going to have a lot of kids that won't be coming in with parents. And I see that as being a nightmare. Now, assume we've talked to legal counsel, that's okay to try to collect data without the parents' permission.
This is Anna. I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
The question is on option number 3, it says, include temperature check and contact information collected by a dedicated clerk position. If say that child is 4 years old, 5 years old, is that going to pose any privacy concerns?
Without a parent present
Without a parent.
providing that information.
I would have to look into that, but I'm not particularly concerned about it. If there were any records requested, it would obviously be something we would consider, that we need to address, but I don't have any initial reactions to that, but I would need to look into it
I
further.
just kind of see it being a nightmare, because if you get different people from different cities, not all the same group is coming in all the time. Just seems like it'd be a never-ending nightmare.
Mr. Hempel, if I could just add in real quick, there are age restrictions in terms of what age you have to be able to attend the pool without some adult supervision, or at least an older, I guess, child, a teenager. So I think Dan was pulling that up. I can't recall if it was what the age was. Dan, did you find it? Is it
But
12?
if they're still a minor, they're still a minor, no matter what the age is. I mean, as long as it's considered a minor in the eyes of the law. Other than that,
Yeah.
I didn't have any problem with option 3.
I think I think the staging, I think, is a good idea. And I would also, at this time, lean towards opening with option 3 and developing a staging, some sort of protocols for later on down the road should events transpire. But starting at option 3, I think.
Yeah, I think option 3 seems fine the way it is, considering the size of our pool, the fact that they used to have 700 to 800 people initially when things opened, and the age, and by the time that it opens will be several months out in terms of vaccines.
Thank you, Ms. Stevens.
One,
Anyone else?
just one comment. I would assume that if we can't get staff, we will have to limit it if we're based on number of available people to work. And I'm making the assumption, surely we'll do that, but I know you guys have already planned that.
Yes, that's correct.
I would, I guess, I'll let other comments transpire or seek guidance on how we want to proceed tonight.
If I could just follow up real quick on Mr. Donnelly's comment, because I think it's a pretty insightful comment that will lead to a discussion we started to have with our pool manager, but until we knew what direction we'd go tonight, we haven't fully flushed out. And that's what happens if we have a positive case with our staff. And how does that impact staffing? How does that impact the ability to open or close the pool, or what adjustments need to be made from that point? But I think it's very relevant to what Mr. Donnelly just asked. And, you know, ultimately, that's the next layer of details that we're going to have to vet through in terms of the operations.
Part of running a business.
Or a school, or a city, or,
Mr. Brakovich, what policy do you want? Do you just need direction, consensus from us?
Yeah, I think what staff would really like to see is a consensus from you as a policymaking board to say, this is what we want to proceed with. We like the options as listed under 3. It would be easier for staff to implement that as opposed to fluctuating depending on other factors that we don't really influence or control, so that we know here's the benchmark and this is what we need from staffing and this is what we'll prepare for to move forward. And then make adjustments should other emergencies arise.
Does that need to be an emotion or just guidance?
Yeah, I think the general discussion has been good, and if I heard correctly, and we get the nodding of the heads, it sounds like option 3 is the one to proceed with from a staffing perspective, and then finish out with the details on, you know, should we get a staff member test positive, and what we would do in those scenarios.
Okay, thank you very much. I guess I'm just going to ask council, is there a consensus that we want to open on time and all that stuff?
yes.
Okay,
Yes.
all right, great.
Does that fit you guys, Janet? Does that, you guys fall with it? It looks like you do.
Yes.
Very good.
Okay. Need anything more from us? Good, okay.
We're good.
Awesome, thank you, everyone. Sorry, bad glasses. Moving on to item E, Resolution 04-2101. George?
Yes, so item E is the resolution the mayor just listed, which is the acceptance of a proposal for engineering services from BG Consultants for the Tonganoxie Industrial Park Waterline Project. Brian Kingsley is here and would be available for any additional questions. What this item is, as you probably recall, when the city went through the Port Authority to request a return of the funds of the balance of $1.7 million from the county's economic development grant given to the business park, which we didn't use. We made a request to consider to get those funds back to complete some utility projects for the park. So the Port Authority considered our request and made a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners to give Tonganoxie $1.2 million for a sanitary sewer interceptor line as well as water needs. And conversely, the Board of County Commissioners took that approval and made an approval of their own. And so those funds were given to us. So recently, or fairly recent action, we moved forward with issuing some debt financing to get the Interceptor Sanitary Sewer project done. But this particular piece, what it considers is then creating the 12-inch looped water line. The city had always contemplating adding an additional water line to what was originally placed in the park. The previous discussion was we didn't put it on the high priority list because we wanted to finish the sewer project and we wanted to wait to see what type of users or what type of usage needs there could be in the park. But following some evaluation we did with the city engineer, we feel pretty confident that putting in the 12-inch looped water line will meet the majority of the needs that we would find in the park. But that doesn't exclude that a project may come along that might have higher needs and we'd have to consider something else. But what it also does is allows us to use those county funds that were given for this project in a timely manner, and again, complete a water utility as had always been contemplated, just not yet prepared. So to do that, the next step would then to be contract with BG to do a design, find a preferred alignment, and one of the biggest variables, and I think we've heard Mr. Hempel comment on this at quite a few meetings recently, is just the incredible fluctuations in material pricing for pipes. And we've seen that already just in kind of putting some feelers out there in late December, early January versus what the unit pricing is today. So we felt that it was time to advance this proposal to you to, at a very minimum, get the design engineering underway, find a preferred alignment, go acquire easements, and if you see fit to give full budget authority, go out and try to get those materials obtained now as well. So the way we've presented it to you for your consideration tonight is as a whole package, from design all the way through material acquisition. And again, because of our incredible public works staff, this is something that we would self-perform, or i.e. Our own staff would do the installation of it. Like I said, Brian's here. I'm sure he'd be happy to answer any questions, or Dan or I could answer any follow-ups as well.
Mr. Kingsley, do you have a statement or anything?
Mayor, City Council, this is Brian Kingsley with BG Consultants. We're the on-call city engineer for the city. And I believe you all have in your packets a copy of an estimate that was prepared that kind of overviewed the costs. I would echo what George said. Been talking about the project for quite a while, but where you have a public works department that is able to construct this, you're probably looking at a number here that's half as large as what it would be if we were to take it through a standard design bid build process rather than just paying for materials and labor. There isn't profit overhead of a construction company involved. It also allows us to put together a more abbreviated set of plans working with Kent. We do still have to submit plans to KDHE and obtain a permit. You're building 8,000 feet of water line, but for 8,000 feet of 12-inch water line, and it's in a rural area, granted, there's not a lot of obstacles like you would have building it down Main Street, Tonganoxie, but the number here of just shy of $290,000 is an extremely attractive number to build a project of this type. We'll also be working, we have interest in the industrial park all the time, so if an industry did come up that was on a short notice, we would be able to work with the timeline and overlap some activities and try to cut that down if we needed to. But I'll be happy to answer any questions about the particulars of the process. I think we've worked through the details as far as we can at a concept level.
Thank you, Mr. Kingsley. Council, do you have any questions for Mr. Kingsley?
Brian or George, either one, is there a supply issue? I mean, I know there's a price issue because it goes up every minute, but is there a supply issue? Do you see one on the horizon that we may run into a supply problem?
We've asked Mr. Heskett to reach out to, I would say, our primary supplier. There's definitely a premium right now attached to a guaranteed delivery of material in a quick turn. And so we've used that, I guess, fairly inflated number as a cost estimate here, but we understand that that's volatile. We would like to go out and acquire at least a couple of other bids on the material, just to make sure that we understand it's a competitive environment, but these numbers are, again, significantly higher than what we just saw 3 or 4 months ago. And we want to make sure that we're making the best investment and use of the taxpayer dollar to get this project completed.
No, and that's just not the supply on pipe, but any valves and everything else you'll engineer into those. I mean, I've seen
Yeah.
already talking with
Yeah,
my guys, they're concerned about supply, so.
Right.
hydrants, yeah, all of it, so.
I do think that getting materials on order is generally good business. There's some unknown going on right now. Right now with pipe specifically, Kent reported to us that it's the resin that it takes to make the PVC that is driving the cost up, but that can change tomorrow with different material availability going into fittings and so forth. So I think that with what George was talking about, with there being some money available to spend from the county or you know, the different pots, once the money becomes available, I think it would be good business, because when you do get an industry at the industrial park, they're going to be on a timeline. You know, everything is going to start and everybody's going to want something done in 9 months, typically, once they say go. So being in a position where you can meet those deadlines is going to be pretty critical.
Awesome. So the sooner the better, in terms of anticipating and trying to head off any potential supply delays or delays otherwise. That's good information. Thank you.
And as such, I make a motion to amend the 2021 sewer capital fund expenditure budget plan to increase authorized expenditures by $1,200,000 to account for the provision of funding support in December 2020 from Leavenworth County.
Before I ask for a second, Mr. Hempel, did you have something you wanted to say?
That, or I can say it after the second, that'll be fine.
I'll second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
Yes. What are we talking about as far as acquiring easements? Are they mostly at one end of the project, or can you identify or just kind of give us a review of if they're at the north end, the south end, or?
Sure. So generally speaking, we're going to need to get from the south tower that's located on the school property or next to the school property. It's a tract of land next to the school property, south to the industrial site. There's a number of alignments. We'll probably end up picking property lines and working with property owners to identify, trying to minimize impact to get from point A to point B at the industrial park. We've looked at a couple of alignments, but I think that we would want to approach some property owners to work with them before we make those alignments public so that we don't create undue anxiety.
I guess my question is, we're not going to use any of the easements that we have in place?
The easements that we have in place, my understanding was that they were for sanitary sewer dedicated only due to the negotiations that took place while we were acquiring the easements. So the majority of those are sanitary sewer only easements. In addition to that, building a water line and a sewer line are two different creatures, because a sewer line is typically gravity, it's underground, out of sight, out of mind. Pressurized water line is something that you'll need to have access to in the future. It'd be nice to have that next to a future road, say. So we'll probably be looking at future street alignments and trying to align that water line where it would be more convenient to maintain in the future.
Well, it was my understanding that both of them could still keep a distance apart and fit in the same easement, for the most part.
They'd have to have 10 feet of separation, so you could do that. Typically, though, you see sanitary sewers constructed down parallel to streams and so forth. You see water lines constructed next to roads.
Well, I guess my main concern and the point I'm trying to make is the fact that we got a 193-day schedule. You're going to be in wintertime. As
For-
far as days, you got 193 days.
for completion, and there again, some of these activities could overlap. Some of them could, if we have materials and we have KDHE approval, the KDHE review and permitting is 90 days. That's the amount of time they ask us to allow them. I think that could realistically come in under that significantly. I think that the survey, easement description, easement acquisition, and design is all going to happen somewhat concurrently. I think that's gonna come together quicker too. This is kind of the worst-case scenario that we've painted here if everything happened.
Then again, until we get done with KDHE, we can't really do anything.
Correct. Not,
Okay.
not as far as digging and constructing.
I was trying to find a quicker way to at least start getting part of it in the ground, because I look at that time frame. You don't have any rain days in there or anything else, by the time you get it, it's gonna stretch out.
Yeah.
I want to make sure I give everyone else a chance to speak before we take the vote, since we have a motion and a second. We all good? Okay. Mr. Porter, will you call the roll on this, please?
Ms. McCutcheon,
Yes.
Ms. Stevens,
Yes.
Mr. Dale,
Yes.
Mr. Donnelly,
Yes.
Mr. Hempel.
Yes,
All ayes, Mayor, motion passes.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. Item F, consider acceptance of.
Mayor, we have two motions in the packet for the last item.
My
I apologize, I
apologies.
should have pointed that out.
No, I knew it. Okay. Was there a second for the other? Or is there a motion for the other?
I'll make a motion to approve Resolution 42101 and authorize staff to issue notices to proceed and complete commodities purchases as described in the Tonganoxie Industrial Park Waterline Project, EOPC, dated April 5th, 2021.
Second.
Okay. Anyone have any comments? Seeing none, Mr. Porter, will you call the roll, please?
Ms. McCutcheon,
Yes.
Ms. Stevens,
Yes.
Mr. Dale,
Yes.
Mr. Donnelly,
Yes.
Mr. Hempel.
yes,
All ayes, Mayor, motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. Item F, consider acceptance of proposal from Logic Compensation. By the way, thank you, Mr. Kingsley, I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
So, take it away, Mr. Brakovich.
Thank you, Mayor. So as you recall, we had advanced a request to issue an RFP for a compensation study and benefit survey. That was an item that was discussed as we developed the 2021 budget back in July of 2020. We issued that RFP. We had some pretty strict timelines because we wanted to get this data or the study itself and survey completed in time as we entered into our budget discussions this year. Either if there was a need to amend budgets this year or more likely to prepare for the 2022 budget. So we issued those. We were happy to have 4 very qualified firms respond to them. Mr. Porter and I developed a matrix to evaluate those proposals based upon the criteria and weight that we had provided within the RFP. As we went through that process, there was one clear leader in the submittals, and that's Logic Compensation Group, LLC. Their proposal hit on all of the requirements we put in. We did do a follow-up call with them. We also reached out to their references. Mr. Porter and I both have some either familiarity with others in their group or some of the other cities that they had worked with. And so we feel very comfortable making the recommendation to advance with Logic Compensation Group. The need to get this project moving is extremely high. And so if there's an approval tonight, they asked to be notified this evening so they can get started on this project tomorrow. I'd be happy to answer any other specific questions you might have, should you have any.
Thank you, Mr. Brakovich. Any questions for staff?
Georgia logistics, obviously this is your highest and best you feel, and the logistics from Tempe, Arizona to here, is there any on-site conversation? Is there any, or is this all online and Zoom and?
We did talk to them about that, and we did discuss potential COVID impacts and how that would influence doing business. As it stands now, we did not price out an on-site visit. We felt that it's a report and data that can be shared. And quite frankly, we're kind of getting a little more bang for the buck in terms of meeting time and the ability to meet with staff and evaluate items as opposed to, $1,000 per trip just to come and do an on-site visit. Their level of experience with communities, both our size and larger, is vast. They come very highly recommended. I can tell you one of their team members that serves as a technical advisor to their group is someone that I worked with in a larger organization previously. He was the principal of that company. And they've worked with a couple of cities in Kansas that are like size to us. What we really liked about their initial proposal was they took the time to evaluate existing resources here. And so as part of their submittal, they acknowledged that they went and looked at the League of Kansas Municipalities and questioned why that resource is still citing 2018 data when that should be updated at a much more frequent pace. So that really got our interest cued about the compensation side. The follow-up questions we did specifically to the benefits survey and how complicated that is for an organization our side, their response in terms of their planned approach to resolve that, not only to get target communities that are like size, but also look at things like employee cost, overall percentage of compensation rate, how that relates back to the benefit side. It was a much more evolved proposal than the others that we received. So I have no doubts they'll do an outstanding job.
Thank you.
Any other questions or discussion? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
I make a motion that we engage the services of Logic Compensation Group for the compensation study and benefit survey.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Stevens. It's been moved and seconded. Mr. Porter, will you take a roll call vote, please?
Ms. McCutcheon,
Yes.
Ms. Stevens,
Yes.
Mr. Dale,
Yes.
Mr. Donnelly,
Yes.
Mr. Hempel.
Yes.
All ayes, Mayor. Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. Item G is the city manager update.
I don't have any additional items tonight, thank you.
Item H is the city attorney agenda. Ms. Christlick,
Nothing other than thank you for the reappointment and putting your trust in me.
thank you. Item I, Mayor Pro Tem agenda, Mr.
I think the
Hempel.
only thing I have to report, and I don't remember if I did it last time or not, that the Codes Appeal Board has been set by the county.
Can you say that again? I didn't quite hear.
The Code Appeals Board has been set by the county for if there's a problem with the codes, there's an appeals board that they can go to.
And that puts city council agenda. Anyone have any items?
I see Monica is here from Tonganoxie Business Association, and they have a lot of exciting things coming up. Movies in the park, and were you at the last meeting? Jake, were you? I was not, but I read the minutes. And that's yeah, why don't you, I just thought it was a lot of cool, fun things going on, and I put them all on my calendar. And
So we
Great
have
to
movies
share.
in the park starting next Friday, and they'll be one a month through September and possibly October, depending on the weather. And then we have Pet Health Day coming up. We have been working with the mayor and city staff for Sunflower Stroll. We have plans already for Spectacular, so flowers are going on the poles in a few weeks, so we have a lot of things already set for this year.
yeah, it's very exciting.
Thank
Thanks
you, Ms.
for all
Key.
you do.
I have one thing, Mayor.
Go ahead.
You received from probably Mary Mack from Leavenworth County Development Corporation and from Dan a survey, or at least 4 questions to fill out about economic development. I would highly encourage you to fill those out. They are using those, and quite frankly, they are going to be a guidepost for the county. And we had a meeting on, Dan, what day was it? I don't remember. And it was not a very good showing, so please take the time if you can. I encourage you to do so. It's going to be something very helpful. And if, Monica, were you looped in on that?
I am looped in, I just can't attend the meetings.
If you could encourage your group to fill it out, because they really want to hear feedback of what the expectations in Leavenworth County are. Thank you.
Thank you,
So
Mr.
just to add to that, to Mr. Donnelly's comment, I believe those surveys went to your Tonganoxie.org emails. So if you have a preference for it to go to another email, let Dan or I know, and we'll redirect it to that email.
Thank you. Mayor, agenda, I've been working on 2 things, and was mentioned, we just did our first and a half planning meeting today, and we've got some exciting things going if we can make them happen. I'm really excited about that. Also, am working with a group of individuals who are trying to get a farmer's market started in Tonganoxie. We have a lot of momentum. We have a lot of real energetic people. And we have a location is the library and as a backup, the United Methodist Church. So that is proceeding quickly, and it should be a great thing for downtown. That's all I have. Any information and communications? Okay, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thanks you all for coming. Have a great night.